Hey, Media People podcast listeners. If you enjoy the podcast, then you're going to love our newsletter, appropriately named the Media People Newsletter. Delivered right to your inbox, each edition is a mix of original and curated content designed to feed your curiosity while aiding in personal development. On top of more podcasts, we'll connect you with articles, interviews, and industry events. Subscribe at mediapeople.ca/newsletter or go to mediapeople.beehive.com. That's BEEHIIV. Thanks for listening to the Media People podcast, lively and insightful chats with the people who power the media industry. I'm your host, Victor Genova. For more episodes, you can go to mediapeople.ca or subscribe wherever you get podcasts, including youtube.com/@mediapeoplepodcast. Views expressed by participants are personal. Sue Haas is the president and COO of NLogic, Canada's leading provider of audience analysis technology and data. But Sue's career didn't start in data and analytics. Her first job in media was an internship on eTalk Daily, researching and writing interview questions for celebrities like Phil Collins, John Mayer, and Nelly. This was a complete shift from her childhood in the rural town of Melbourne, Ontario. How rural? No cable TV, dial-up internet was the norm. She had to travel one town over just to go to school, and there weren't many opportunities for part-time work. Sue Haas stops by to chat about growing up on a hobby farm, studying English and journalism in university, a career that included everything from digital product development to getting John Mayer coffee, and what NLogic has in store for the future.
NLogic is a technology and software company that creates data products and solutions really for the entire Canadian media industry. We work with all aspects of the sector, from broadcasters and publishers to ad agencies and advertisers directly. Historically, NLogic has been described as a software company for measurement, but we're really changing that brand identity to be more data focused, because we aren't just measuring what people watch and listen to in media anymore. We're blending data together. We're creating different types of solutions that aren't just a measurement of what you watch and hear.
Sue, thank you so much for stopping by. It's been a while. It's been a couple of years. And for the listeners out there, Sue and I used to work together at Blue Ant Media. And so I'm getting to learn a lot about you today. And I knew you were from the London area, but I didn't know you were from, can I say it with an Australian accent, Melbourne, Ontario?
That's correct. I don't think very few people have heard of Melbourne, Ontario. It has a population, I think, around 400 people. And I spent the first almost 18 years of my life on a hobby farm just outside of Melbourne. And if you don't know what a hobby farm is, it's what you call a farm that's not quite a working farm. So you're not a full-time farmer as your career. My parents were both high school teachers, but they did farming as a hobby. And there's about, when I was younger, almost 200 acres, which we sold off a lot of that land. It's 50 acres now. My mom still lives there to this day.
Let's touch on hobby farming for a little bit, because if you're not making any money off of the land the way, I guess, a professional farmer would, what attracted your parents to hobby farming?
I mean, that's a great question. They built the house, I believe it was they bought the land in the early 70s. I think they built the house in 1972. My dad's older brother was an engineer. He's told me many times he's one of the only engineers/architects in Southwestern Ontario. You had to get two separate designations, one as an architect, one as an engineer, and he had both. And he did a lot of the paperwork on the building property. I think they just wanted to live outside of the city. We had a tractor growing up. I first learned how to drive on a tractor, and I would help do the field work. But there was also a bit of a stigma if living there, for working the land and not being a full-time farmer. And I know my dad faced that a bit. I think he just wanted to try it. My mom really enjoyed living outside the city. As I said, she still lives there today. She lives by herself. She's in her mid-70s, and really just enjoys being outside.
What was life like growing up, not only on the farm, but in Melbourne, Ontario?
I think it's hard to remember how you felt in the moment. Looking back, I'm very nostalgic of it. I talk about it a lot. I'm surprised myself by how much I talk about growing up there, because it was obviously really influential on my life and who I am as a person. I spent a lot of time outside. we had a pond that I used to swim in as a kid, and a creek I would swim in. Eventually, when I was 16, 17, my mom made a huge investment and built an in-ground pool. She says she says now she did it to kind of keep us around the house because we were, teens and going out on our own, and eventually, obviously, moving out. But I do have very fond memories of being young there till about 12 or 13, when it became sort of torturous. You don't have your driver's license yet. I couldn't even ride my bike to my closest friend's house. It was that far. And so you're very dependent on your parents to drop you off and take you places. Couldn't really get a part-time job because you can't get to a job. So it was tough around 12 or 13 till 16 when you got your license, and then it became a little more fun again.
So socially, though, everything had to happen at school, I guess, like all your interactions with your friends, just because distance was a factor after school.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I went to my friends' houses a lot. So there was a lot of hanging around my friends and a lot of sleeping over because you couldn't get back home. So tons of sleepovers, a lot of people coming over to my house. Yeah, there's no hanging around town after school. There was no, I mean, I also lived outside of the town, remember? So it really in the country, and even getting into the little town of Melbourne it's about 4 kilometers. So to even get into the closest little town. But I remember riding my bike in there to rent VHS tapes on the weekend to watch a movie. Also, speaking of media, there was no cable out there. And in fact, there wasn't even high-speed internet till about 5 years ago, believe it or not. Rogers finally put a tower down where my mom lives, but never cable. We got about 3 channels. We had the old antenna and could sometimes pick up some TV from Detroit. Where my farm is it's closer to London, Ontario, but it's about just under 2 hours from Detroit. So you could pick up signal from there on a good day.
Is it like around the St. Thomas area?
Yes, it's close to St. Thomas, a little bit more west of St. Thomas.
What attracted you to volleyball in high school? Because you were quite successful in there. This is the first time I think I've had an OFSA champion on the podcast.
Really? Oh,
Yep.
I'm glad I have that. I can bring that to the podcast. I still bask in that glory. I have to check myself because I was, 15, 16. But I loved volleyball. That was another great thing about being in a small town is I did make the sports teams, and I have two girls, one's 13 and one's 10, and they're not as interested, I would say, in sports as I was growing up, but they've tried out and sometimes made it onto teams and sometimes not. And I made it to all the teams because, there just wasn't a ton of competition. That's not to say there weren't amazing athletes. There were, but it is a benefit to being in a small area. And it was just a school that embraced volleyball and had some really strong coaching. And I don't know what I loved about it. It was fun. I loved the team camaraderie. We did a lot of weekend tournaments. We ended up winning OFSA bronze one year. If people don't know listening, OFSA is the Ontario finals, and you were competing against the entire province. And there's single A, double A, and triple A. Triple A, it's based on the population size of your school. Because our school was small, it was single A. So that's everyone in the same population bracket. I don't know exactly. It's probably up to 500 or 600 kids. And we won bronze one year and we won gold one year. It was in North Bay. I'll never forget that tournament. But we played AAA schools, bigger schools in tournaments. We just didn't compete with them in the finals.
Would you say hobby farming helped you in sport? Simply because, I mean, in order to be a farmer, professional or hobby or otherwise, you've got to be active. And at the same time, too, you've got to learn to work with each other. Farming is a team sport.
That's an interesting question. I don't know if I did a lot of team farming. My brothers and I don't think we ever really worked together on the farm. We would either begrudgingly do the work if we were asked, or we would fight over it because we wanted the money for the weekend. But I would say no to that. However, 100% sports helped me in where I am today with my career and through my jobs. And in fact, I did a small stint in Korea teaching English in my mid 20s. And when I came back, and I had been working at Alliance Atlantis if you know that company, before I left at historytelevision.ca. I ran the website there. And I left Alliance Atlantis, went to Korea for a year, came back and was unemployed. I'd rented an apartment in Parkdale in Toronto, was like really excited to live on my own. I started burning through all my savings and I could not get a job. It was months. I was applying everywhere. I was often in tears, like 3-4 interviews deep, didn't get the job. I was starting to get really mad that I'd taken this hiatus to go teach, because I felt like it rendered me like unemployable coming back. And then I had an interview at an agency, a digital agency. So they developed, not an ad agency, but digital agency. So they developed websites and digital products. And one of the questions was around my how assertive I was and my competitive level. And I started talking about competitive sports. I talked about volleyball. I talked about Ontario finals, and they gave me the job. And I telling you, they gave me the job based on those answers. They had a slew of project managers who were too passive with this one client, and they wanted someone who could work well and have obviously a team mentality, but also had that competitive edge from sports. So I do think I do want to see, especially females, get more into sports. I really do think it helps with your career growth and learning how to work with people in a high energy environment.
Well, sports set me up a little bit for sales, that's for sure, because I used to be a swimmer. And swimming, not that I was a great swimmer, but swimming, you've got to compete against your teammates, but then at the same time, you've got to help them in the relays. So it's like this level of
Mm-hmm.
competition.
Mm-hmm. What was your stroke?
Oh, poorly, freestyle or breast.
My
And
daughters are into swimming. One's just starting to get into lifeguarding. She's a bit young, but she's doing the entry level. And they don't really do butterfly anymore, do they? Or did they do it when you were there? I don't see
oh,
anyone do that.
oh, they did it. I didn't do it. I stayed away from it. I kind of looked like I was drowning. But good on your daughter for becoming a lifeguard. I did that. I enjoyed it. Although it was kind of funny because one of the superpowers I got out of it was filling out police reports, soaking wet and cold. I say to anyone,
Oh.
I'm like, if you need someone to do that, like I'm your guy.
Did you ever have to save a life?
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
wow.
I mean, nothing like overtly dramatic. Like it's at a pool though, so you can see it go wrong right in front of you. But I'd say probably the worst thing that happened, I'd say this was one of the worst things where it was at the city of Mississauga, and they had this really stupid rule that I disagree with, and I'll call it stupid out loud, where if you can't swim in the deep end, you can put on a life jacket and go in the deep end. But that still causes a problem because the kids will hop in and think, oh, this is fun, and then they can't touch the bottom, and then they freak out, and then they grab whoever's closest to them. And so that's where
Bring them down.
that's where the problem would manifest. Like you could easily solve that problem. Like never did I have to do CPR or anything like that. It was at a swimming pool in Mississauga that was kind of in, I don't want to call it a bad neighborhood, but we would deal with things like kids would get assaulted in the change room because they would just fight with each other and things
Mhm.
like that. So it's nothing like out of Baywatch, that's for sure. But off mic, you want to ask me any questions about it? I'll gladly
Oh,
answer that.
I
But
will.
but anyways, why do you credit your mom as being your biggest influence?
My mom is one of those people that can she's so creative. She has so many natural talents, and I've always been in awe of that. She was an art teacher, so she was trained in education, and she could do photography in the dark room. She often over the summer for fun would just set up a dark room in our basement. She did pottery. She would bring a pottery wheel home. She had a kiln in her classroom, so she could dry out the pottery. And she did watercolors and acrylic, all sorts of painting and murals. It still is an avid sewer. She would sew costumes and for the school plays, and she made a lot of my clothes growing up. A lot of my clothes were handmade, and she directed the plays too. She didn't just work behind the scenes, but she was the director, and often they were written like well-known famous plays. But she would write sometimes as well. Avid reader, but she also runs this farm. I mean, my parents are divorced, but for many years they were together. But she's lived there on her own for almost 30 years now, and does runs the tractor, does all the gardenings. As it has an amazing flower beds. She bakes and cooks. Anyways, she can do a lot of things. I have like the smallest fraction of those sort of, I would say, life skills. And she does it, without, loves doing it, does it without complaint, and is just has a lot of natural talent. And I look up to that.
You had an interesting first job, and you call this your first real job, and it was a little bit late in life at 18 years of age. So let's start first with why it was difficult, because you already alluded to it, why it was difficult to have a part-time job in your teens in Melbourne.
Yeah, so it was hard to a few of my friends in the small town. So Melbourne was my small town. It was way too small for a high school. So I went to high school in a town called Glencoe, which is about 2,500 people and about 300 like students at the high school. And some of my friends would work at the variety store, or there was a gas station, they'd work there. Anywhere you could work, they worked. But because I was about a 20-minute drive from that town, and definitely before I had a license, and then of course once you have a license you have to have access to a car regularly, I couldn't work in that town, and there really was nothing to do in my small town because there was one restaurant, one gas station. There was very few opportunities. I did babysit as a kid, here and there, but my first real job, you're right, it was late in life. It was 18. I was a tree planter, and I was in my 5th year of high school. Back then we had, in Ontario, you had OAC, which was your 5th year where you'd try to get credits to get into university. And I had already gotten the 6 that I needed. And so I dropped out halfway through the year. And my older cousin, owned a tree planting business in Alberta. And I got wind of that somehow, and she offered me a job, and I flew standby from London, Ontario to Edmonton. And I had I remember one of my dad's old hockey bags as my luggage. And I took the Greyhound bus all up to Fox Creek, Alberta, which is, I don't remember exactly, about an hour, 2 hours north of Edmonton. And I worked there for the whole summer. So I arrived in April, and then spring and summer, and then I came home at the end of August.
So how did Fox Creek compare to Melbourne? Was there any sort of culture shock going there? Like, I say that partially in jest, but I'm serious because this is your first time getting out of, even though you did have access to London, Ontario, which is a fairly big city in Canada, this was your first time really leaving the nest.
Yeah, so I've been to Toronto. Like I wasn't completely isolated. Like I'd gone to musicals in Toronto and school trips and things like that. But yes, it was bigger than Melbourne. I remember I had a bar for one, and the drink, and in fact, the bar was called Susie Q's. So I'll never forget that. Because my name is Sue, of course, and my family did call me Susie growing up. My dad actually had a vanity license plate that said Susie H. Oh my gosh, this sidebar, but he insisted I take the license plate when I, sort of moved away. So I did. And then I promptly got rid of it, because every time you go into a store with your car, people start calling you by your name. Hey, Susie. And it took me a while to clue in that they're reading my license plate. Anyway, the bar in Fox Creek was called Susie Q's, and you could drink at 18 in Alberta. And so that was fun. I turned 19 over that summer when I was there, so I celebrated my birthday. It was slightly bigger than Melbourne. It was a very different life experience. The crew on that tree planting crew, there was 30 of us. Very, very uncommon that it was 50% female, 50% male. It's generally much more male skewed. And it was just really life-changing for me. I was the youngest, by the way, too. Of the 30, I was the youngest one.
Was it easy slipping into that kind of general labor just because you had that farming experience?
I will give you this one. Yes, I would say also, and this is not uncommon for a tree planting crew, many people quit. And I don't remember the exact number, but by the end of the 30, there was maybe 13 left. I don't quote me on that, but a lot of people drop off. And I definitely stayed to the end. It was hard. You were up at 5:30 in the spring. When you arrive in April, there was a few days where it was snowing, it was freezing, and you're working outside all day. And then by the end, of course, it's sweltering hot and you're getting attacked by bugs. But living in the country and being on the farm absolutely helped for that first job.
Why did you attend Western University and why did you study English?
Going to Western was purely just a result of living close by. Looking back now, it seems maybe it's not it's not the experience everyone else had. But as a kid, I thought it was normal that everyone's parents and aunts and uncles would go to the same school. Both my parents went to Western. My dad's brothers went there. My mom's brother and sister went there. Everyone went there because they were in the area, and it's a fairly good school, I guess. So we just went and stayed home. Lived at home. I don't know if I would have traveled to go there if I lived somewhere else. I doubt I would have. And interestingly, not a lot of my cousins went to university, like the next generation. There's quite a big fall off. Both my brothers didn't go. It was me and then another one of my cousins. But anyway, I studied English, so I was also very interested in science, and I had marks that I could apply for an environmental science program. I applied at Guelph. I applied, I think, at Waterloo. I didn't get in, and my English marks were higher. And actually, I went to King's College my first year, which is the sort of Catholic arm of Western, and because they offered me a small scholarship, and I took that. And then after the first year, I transferred to main campus because I found King's College just too small for me. It was fun, but I transferred. But I really don't think I would have got into English if they hadn't offered me that scholarship.
You also studied journalism at Toronto Metropolitan University, but did you do a bit of traveling in between this, after? Like, where does that factor in?
I did. So I mentioned
You mentioned Korea.
I went to Korea. The Korea was after. I know I'm trying to even get the timeline straight in my own head. I went to Europe for a very not the most not a unique experience, but I went to Europe with a friend. We arrived in Ireland. I have a family from Ireland. No one that I'm close with. I actually didn't even meet any of them when I was there, but I do have heritage there. She also did. We worked in Dublin. I was a bartender in Dublin for off and on through the summer. And then we ended up traveling. I spent 3 weeks in Rome and went to France and met another friend who was from the Czech Republic and stayed with her family for about 3 or 4 weeks, I believe. And then I had applied to the journalism program. It wasn't a master's at the time. It was called a postgraduate 2-year, but now they let you certify as masters because they switched it into a full master's program. But anyhow, I found out that I got in, and I packed up and I moved to Toronto. My neighbor drove me down in his truck, and I rented a apartment with a friend from London, actually one of the friends I traveled through Europe with. She stayed 1 year, and then she went back home. And then I had another roommate 1 year and left, and then another roommate. It wasn't me, I swear. But I think a lot of people try Toronto for a year, try it for a little bit, and then maybe they find that the city's too big or they're not comfortable, and they go back to Ottawa or go back to London or wherever they started off from. But I'm still here in Toronto. It's been well over 20 years now. It's goes by really fast.
Did they ever think it was too cramped? Because that's the funny thing about moving to Toronto from, say, a place where you're from, where you had what, 200? I know it was reduced to 50 acres, but it started at 200 acres.
Mm-hmm.
You moved to a bigger city with more people, but the amount of space that you have to yourself shrinks considerably. And I always wonder if that impacts people.
There's definitely members of my family who won't come visit me because mostly they hate the drive. They are very either feel unsafe or uncomfortable. They just can't stand the traffic. It's an uncomfortable feeling. I don't have that. I mean, as I said, I visited Korea and I've traveled a lot since then, and I enjoy having people around me. I also had the privilege and ability to go back home to my mom's place, and that's always been a retreat for me. It's not quite a cottage, but I treat it like my cottage. And if I didn't have that, where I could go back to the country really whenever I wanted. When I was younger, I'd just take the Greyhound bus from Toronto back home, and very rarely the train, but I take the bus forever. They ended up canceling that route. They canceled the Greyhound entirely. But I have a car now. I still go. I go with my kids. I was just there for the long weekends. In fact, if I didn't have that, I think it would be harder. But there's quite a few of my relatives who don't like coming to Toronto at all. My dad, honestly, is one of them. I don't think he's come here to visit me. Well, now he's not as confident driving, but even when he could, I think he's been here 3 times. He rarely comes.
I hear them on the traffic though, because you're flying on the 401, everything's fine, and then as soon as you get maybe about 20 kilometers out from the city center, everything comes to a standstill. Like they've got to find a way to fix that, which they're
It's
not.
painful. Yeah.
We see the construction they're doing on the Gardner right now. It's you get past Jameson going eastbound, and it's now down to 2 lanes. Hooray! And it's going to be like that till 2027, according to the sign. But I digress.
I don't know what it is with the GTA. I mean, it's well known. You hear about it from people in other cities about how bad Toronto traffic is, and I don't know. It's something to do with the configuration of the highways. I don't know, but it's not pleasant. I will give you that.
Let's talk about your first job after graduation, because this is when you make your dive into media. So, how did the
Mhm.
internship at eTalk Daily come about?
Yeah, that was a great experience. I when I was doing the post grad degree, I specialized in broadcasting. So you either went into newspaper, magazine, or broadcasting. Thank God I picked broadcasting now. This for newspaper and magazine publishing is had a really hard go, obviously, or radio. Sorry, radio as well. And there was no digital. There was no digital media or digital publishing. You did a few courses on it at the time, but it wasn't its own stream. So I went into broadcasting, and from there was a compulsory internship co-op program. And I don't remember, I must have just I don't remember how I got it, but I applied and got in, and it was great. It was I really liked my boss, Karen Barzilay, and she was great, and the team was friendly, and I got to meet celebrities. So I would help prepare the questions. I didn't of course do the actual interview. That was for the famous VJs, but an interview and reporters. But I prepared the questions, and I would be on set, and I did the questions for a John Mayer interview. I did the questions for Nelly at the time, Phil Collins, Chantal Kreviatsik. We went to her house. Yeah, so that was pretty fun for someone in their mid-20s, relatively new to the city. It was a good experience.
Was that surreal? Farm girl with only 3 channels. All of a sudden, you're you're what? You're literally asking John Mayer, Phil Collins if they need anything before an interview.
It's hard to go back into myself at the time, but it was John Mayer was really famous then, and that was yeah, it was great. He was extraordinarily tall, and he I did have to go across the street to get him a coffee, and I'll always remember this. And then he asked me to pour it out, and then he just wanted it on set to. And I honestly don't remember if I put water in it or he literally had an empty coffee cup and pretended to drink it, but it's definitely I've still retold those stories many times through my life. So I'm glad I had the experience.
Why was he famous? Because I mean, I can't really name one of his songs, and it seems like every time he's in the news, it's for who he's dating. I can name
What do
that, his ex-girlfriends, but I cannot name any of his music. That's like when he ended up on my radar. Oh, he's dating Jennifer Aniston. Oh, he's dating, oh, I forget her name already. I think she's married to Orlando Bloom right now. Katy Perry.
you don't know "Body Is a Wonderland"? That's such a famous song.
Uh,
Uh,
that's a suggestive song. No, I'm not. That sounds like the type of song that would get someone canceled today.
he sings. I mean, I I'm not a huge John Mayer fan either. I don't even know if he's put out any new music in the last decade or so, but he definitely had a lot of ballads, a lot of love songs back in the day. I think he was considered quite the heartthrob among uh, among teens and young folk. I don't know. I thought I liked his songs back in the day in my 20s. I don't listen to him now. I don't As I said, I don't even know if he's put out anything new. But who did he date? It was Jennifer Aniston, wasn't it?
I threw that one out there first. Katy Perry.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
forget who else was in there. I think he dated Taylor Swift too.
He did? Wow. Yeah,
See,
see, I
that's the
mean,
thing.
if
He's
they
like,
they see something in him, there's obviously something there.
yeah, but they
I mean,
didn't
we're not
last
saying.
though. So what did they see? And then what do they want to unsee now? No disrespect to John Mayer or anything, but anyways, we're
He's very
digressing.
tall. Um, he's cute in person, I think.
After that, you moved to Alliance Atlantis. Okay,
Mhm,
you already name dropped them. Unfortunately, they're no longer with us because I know
mhm.
that there were a series of mergers or acquisitions, but how did that come about?
Yeah, so right after the eTalk Daily internship, I got a job at a company called BTV Communications, a very small independent production company. The office was smack dab in Yorkville, literally beside the the old Tiffany store on Bloor Street, that is no longer there, by the Windsor Arms, if you're familiar with where
Wait, did
that
you say
is.
the Tiffany store? That I'm familiar with. That's closed down in Yorkville?
Well, I don't think it's where it used to be. I don't think so. I could be wrong, but I thought I walked by it the other day and it wasn't there.
Like across the
But
street
right,
from Harry Rosen and Roots, right?
hmm yes,
Huh.
yes. But I was in an office right beside there, and I had applied for a job as a production assistant, I believe was my title. And the job entailed, really what the job entailed was they ran business segments on global TV on air, and I think they ran on another channel, but they would do these half-hour business segments, which is really a paid profile of a company. And part of my job was literally cold calling all these businesses to see if they wanted to get profiled. And we would do it. I had the yellow pages basically, and would go through and a big book and go through and just highlight off the names one by one, go through and call and see if people were interested in being profiled. I also would send out faxes to see if there was interest, if you could believe that. It doesn't not seem like the most efficient way to do lead generation, but we would send out faxes if we had the fax number. And I must have sent emails too, but that was the not fun part of the job. The more interesting part was I did do some actual post-production where I'd go watch through footage and pull B-roll to put into the editing of the segments. I got to do that and go through some of the old footage and use some of my journalism skill there. But I met some great people on the job, and it got me some experience to put on my resume, and I got paid. It wasn't a lot. And I say this sometimes to people, I think I was making 21,000 a year. This is like that, my very, very first job. And through that time I was interning at Alliance Atlantis. It was unpaid internship. And I was writing stories for them for their website. And they were legitimate historical stories about what happened at Carthage. Or I remember I did a series on film noir. And maybe today you'd ask ChatGTP or some other AI assisted service. Then you would use Wikipedia. At this point, Wikipedia, I don't even remember if it existed, but it was not very robust. And I would go, because it was actually not that far from the Alliance Atlantis, I was working remote because I was at the production company. I would go to the Toronto Reference Library and pull microfilm and all these books and do research for these articles unpaid. And I would write these articles. I got bylines. So as a journalism grad, I wanted the bylines. And they got published, and my boss, Deanna McFadden, and I became, she was a great mentor. She was a great boss. She liked the work that I did. And so when a paid position opened up as the producer of History Television.ca, the other person who had the job before left, she really encouraged me to apply, and she really prepped me for the interview. And I applied and I got it. And I really don't think, looking back, I would have gotten the job if she hadn't helped prep me for it. Just really goes to show, who and the influences and support that you do have to get into the workforce, like initially. But yeah, that was my first full-time, like way better pay job. And I loved Alliance Atlantis. It was a super cool place to work. Michael McMillan, who was the CEO, became the CEO of Blue Ant Media, and I was at Blue Ant Media for 13 years. And so it was great to reconnect with him and his culture and leadership. But yeah, it was a great place to be and to start off.
I've heard nothing but positive things about Alliance Atlantis. Never worked with the company or for the company, but my short experience with them was when I was in broadcast at CBC, Ken West had bought Alliance Atlantis.
Yeah.
And at that point they were going through a reorganization, and there were a lot of sales professionals at Alliance Atlantis who either didn't want to stick around to see what their fate would be, or maybe they were a little nervous and they saw opportunity at CBC and they made the jump. I remember at one point, I think we brought on one quarter about between 3 and 5 former Alliance Atlantis people.
They did move in pockets. Another big pocket of staff went to Blue Ant because Michael was there. So there was quite a few of us from Alliance Atlantis at Blue Ant in the early days. And I actually, as you know, I made it there not because of my Alliance Atlantis connections. I made it there because I was working at Cottage Life Media at the time, and Blue Ant Media acquired Cottage Life Media. So I came through an acquisition. But when I arrived there, it was a really great reunion because there were so many ex-Alliance Atlantis employees working there.
So let's talk about that then right now. So you moved to Cottage Life Media. What was that like?
That was an unexpected move. So for that job I told you about earlier that I got I believe, based on playing volleyball and having that feeling of competition, that competitive edge that I demonstrated in my interview. That job I had, I think, for about 5 years. And then they ended up shutting that office down. It was an agency in Toronto, but it was part of this um, global healthcare company, and they shut the Toronto office down. I was part of a crew that was last few people standing to turn the lights off. And actually, personal story is I was pregnant at the time. It was my first kid, and I was really had no idea what happened with benefits and getting laid off. I didn't know if I was going to get my mat leave, and I was just sort of struggling. And a friend of mine who I worked with, his name was Simon Smith. He said, "Hey, I think you would be great to do some consulting for this guy I know, Terry Selwood, who he met through Burning Man. They're both Burning Man people, and that's a
What a
very
connection.
sunset.
What a connection.
I don't know if you know the many people who go to Burning Man, but they're a particular type. And
I had one colleague who went to Burning Man. He would go, it was the company I was at before, Blue Ant Media, and apparently it is a pain in the ass to apply and get approved for tickets. And so when he was doing it, I remember he was doing it at the office and it was a big deal. And then you have to rent the RV to get there. But you're right. I have seen Burning Man photos. It's kind of like a hipster version of Mad Max or Furiosa, where everyone's out to have fun instead of rob each other of gasoline.
I mean, I have never been there. I don't know if I would like it, if it would be for me or not, but the fact that Terry Selwood and Simon Smith became friends, I think anything can happen there for sure, because they were quite different. But anyhow, I met Terry. I met him at for lunch. Actually, he didn't show up. He stood me up for lunch, and I thought, well, there goes that. And then he wrote me a note later saying he had some issue with his email. So we met the next week. He hired me on the spot. I was 6 months pregnant, and I was going to just do some consulting for 3 months. And I went off, had the baby, and we had a verbal agreement that I'd come back in 8 months, and nothing signed on paper, really. And he brought me back in 8 months. I came back at that time, and he hired me full time. And I was sort of there ever since. It brought me back. The great thing about Cottage Life, it was very similar to Alliance Atlantis, because they were sort of lifestyle. History was factual, but I also worked at HGTV when I was at Alliance Atlantis, and I ran that website for a short stint while there. So that was very similar to Cottage Life. So that was great to get back into that sort of lifestyle outdoor space. And I liked that it was a small company. It was a family-owned company. Al Zikovitz owned it. And Terry worked for Al, and they didn't have a digital department. They had a couple people that did digital at the time, and I came in to oversee a sort of new department, and they were all print magazines that were digitizing. So print magazines that were building up an online presence and trying to get some on like website inventory, no videos of display ads. They had a newsletter. You know it a little bit, Victor, because you worked with Cottage Life for a few years.
I hawked it for 4 years. Yep. It was part of my portfolio when I was at Blue Ant.
We're going to take a quick break. Enjoying this episode? Of course you are, or you wouldn't have made it this far. Complement your listening experience by subscribing to the Media People newsletter at mediapeople.ca/newsletter or at mediapeople.beehive.com. It's a mix of original and curated content designed to feed your curiosity while aiding in personal development. On top of more podcasts, we'll connect you with articles, interviews, and industry events. Subscribe at mediapeople.ca/newsletter or mediapeople.beehive.com.
I want to ask you a question, though, about that job interview. So let's go back 3 minutes, because you got stood up, and obviously, in hindsight, you know it was email issues. Why did you decide to take the second interview? Because a lot of people would have said, he left me hanging. I'm not doing this again. Kind of like fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And then not only did you take that interview, but then you also had a verbal agreement that you would only do 8 months of mat leave and there'd be something waiting for you. So there was nothing set in stone to protect you. A lot of trust there. Where did you get that trust from?
I think to take the second lunch interview was, and it was over lunch. It was an Indian buffet restaurant, which is great actually in King Street. I don't think I've gone back since, but it was really good, I remember. And I had nothing to lose. I was, as I said, I was 6 months pregnant. I wasn't planning to work. And so it was either going to be take this job or not take a job and just go off and enjoy my 3 months before I had the kid, which I honestly was equally interested in doing. So I think part of me was, I was okay with not getting it because then I could have a little time off. But I like challenging myself. I don't know why I went back in for the second interview. I liked Terry. I liked his rapport over email. And I did trust him. There was nothing, there was a part of me when I went off on mat leave that knew there was a risk that I wouldn't have a job at the end of the 8 months. I guess I'm a little less risk prone than other people. I'm what do I mean by there? I take more risk, I think, and I've learned that about myself. Even taking this job at NLogic that I'm in now, there was many people that I talked to, I know, who wouldn't have gone for it. It's a little bit outside of what my background was, data measurement. Certainly the title was higher than the roles that I'd had previously. And sometimes you just have to jump in and have faith, I guess. Not, religious faith, but just believe in karma.
Faith in the universe.
Yes.
Do you remember when you heard where you were, what you were doing when you heard Blue Ant Media had acquired Cottage Life Media, and what went through your mind? Because on one side you're thinking, oh no, I know what this could mean for my employment status, but then on the other side you're looking at that going, oh my God, I get to work with a lot of my old peers from Alliance Atlantis again.
Yeah, I don't know if I remember when I first heard about it, but I like to think that I was excited more than nervous because I had an opportunity to work with a bigger group that had a bigger digital presence and had more people working in that space. One thing that would have been a challenge with Cottage Life Media was there was maybe 5 of us in digital in a print first business. And that had been a bit of my experience in a lot of my jobs. Even at Alliance Atlantis, we called them interactive at the time. The digital group was called interactive, and we referred to ourselves as attractive interactive. To this day, when I talk to people from that group, they're like, we were part of the attractive interactive division. And you were the scrappy sort of new group that was emerging, but you were really far behind the front runner, which at Alliance Atlantis was broadcast, of course, and at Cottage Life was print. And so going to Blue Ant, although it was also broadcast, would have been the main, like the big fish at that company too. I was excited to at least have more people working in a digital group. And there were product people, developers, designers. There was video. We didn't have a video presence at Cottage Life. So I was interested in getting that exposure and working with more people. And I did, and I worked with a lot more brands. So at Cottage Life, we had obviously Cottage Life. There was also a magazine called Explore, which was a travel magazine, adventure magazine with some travel. Canadian Home Workshop, which was woodworking, and Outdoor Canada, which was hunting and fishing. And I oversaw the digital components of those print brands. But then when I moved to Blue Ant, almost immediately, I started to oversee the Ox brand, which was music and culture, Byte, which was comedy at the time, the Byte and Ox are now shut down, but it was there when I arrived. Travel and Escape, which was travel. So I got to work with a lot of other consumer brands too, which was great.
Is it safe to say that when Cottage Life was acquired by Blue Ant Media and your role changed, you really got to see a lot of potential? Like you were looking 1, 2, 3 years down the road to say, okay, you know what? Maybe it's not where it needs to be right now, but it's only trending towards digital.
Yes, for sure. I saw, even at that point in time, it's interesting. Hey, for some of us who started in digital at the beginning was websites. It was written, articles on websites with display ads. We didn't even have video yet. That would maybe be the next, and maybe newsletters with a couple of ads. But as you know, the ad experience on newsletters is very limited. You had search, of course, but then video, emerged, and it would be pre-roll on websites. And now when someone says digital, they mean streaming. They mean Netflix. They mean Amazon Prime. They mean gaming. It's really changed, or podcasting, of course. It's really changed from when digital meant articles on a website. But but even then there was, even though it was mostly articles, there was this fear that digital was going to take over traditional, TV and certainly print. And in a way it did take over print.
I can concur with that. When I was at the old Astral Media pre-Bell acquisition, one of the things that we had, we're going back, 14 years. One of the things that we had was French pre-roll, but we had quality French pre-roll because kind of like how you were at Alliance Atlantis and you mentioned you worked on history, we had the French version of it because Astral co-owned it with, at that time, I think it was Shaw at that point because it changed hands so many times, but a lot of them, like there was Showcase, there was a French version of Showcase, I forgot what they called it as well, and they put a lot of the programming up online. And then what happened was, I don't know this for a fact, I just know it's true, that there seemed to be backlash from the broadcast side of the business to say, take those videos down. And when those videos went down, so did our ad inventory. And that was one of the things too we were begging for was more and more French pre-roll because we were absolutely crushing it left, right, and center, but they were threatened by the impact it was going to have on broadcast. Even though, like we said, it was trending towards digital. It's like, no, you want to ramp up on this way. You don't want to try to hold it back.
There was always a bit of a threat, and it was, I mean, between, traditional media and digital media, and it's still always mentioned separately, I find. It could be just my exposure to working in companies that have traditional media as the foundation. So maybe, if I worked at, I don't know, what's a brand that started off as a like Vice. I mean, that's about Refinery 29, all these ones that are having trouble, but like a brand that started off as digital, even Vice didn't, I guess, but you wouldn't have that feeling.
BuzzFeed's a good example of that.
BuzzFeed, thank you. I couldn't think of a pure play online entity, but yes, that would be one of them. But yeah, I was very excited to go to Blue Ants. Another Simon Foster, ran the digital group there, and I reported to him for several years, and he was a great boss, and he was very, he loved to try things. He had still has a lot of energy. He took a lot of risk too. And we got along in that way, and always were trying to test things and take a bit of risk and believed in digital and had fun working on digital. And it was I met a lot of great people who I still work with today from that experience.
And your tenure at Blue Media, that went, would you say 13 plus years?
Yes. Yeah.
You were also Senior Director of Digital Sales Operations, VP of Digital Media, and then your final role was SVP Digital Global Media. With these promotions, how did your roles change? Like, did you relinquish any duties as you went up and replace them with new ones?
The main thing that changed was from my journalism background, I came in generally through the content side. So that even happened at Cottage Life Media, although I did run the entire digital group at Cottage Life Media. So clearly it was beyond content, but I often would get laddered back to content. So at Blue Ant, there was a period of time where we had a head of product. So that would be developers, designers, coders, et cetera. And then we would have a head of sales and operations, and then a head of content. I would generally be lumped in with the head of content side or the content people. But really, I was never a really great writer. I can still be a pretty good editor. Like I can edit copy and headlines and things like that, but it was never I was never that good at it. And it was never my passion. I liked running the teams and seeing everything at a higher level, like across all the subsets. And eventually that is what happened at Blue Ant. So I ended up running, operations, product, all of it together. And even though a lot of people who knew me from when I started still would see me as the content person, I never really saw myself as that person. I don't think I ever gave great feedback on content direction, apart from maybe a strategy. I definitely could do content strategy and how content could lead to higher traffic, certain content ideas that could generate better sales leads. But the pure creative part of the content, that was never really my forte. But I would say how it changed was going from more of a content beginning to overseeing the whole thing end to end. And then eventually when I ended up leaving, Blue Ant at that point had moved to being, I think it's fair to say, predominantly a global company versus Canadian. And that's the main thing that changed in my title, and my responsibilities was overseen from a global perspective. And I had a team in Washington, a couple of people in LA. And then I was overseeing sales, everything at that point.
Well, there was a certain point at the company, you and I were both there for that, when our email addresses changed from .ca to .com.
That's right. Did you remember Sam Draska? She worked there for a time being. She came in on the product side, but she was the one who flagged, hey, there's blueantmedia.com domain that we should be squatting on. And then we did. She flagged it. We got it for so cheap. And then when it opened up, Raja Khan at the time was the CEO, and I'm like, hey, this .com opened up, we better get it. That was really why it changed. I bet you to this day we'd still have the .ca if she hadn't flagged that. And thank goodness, because it's a global company and it wouldn't work very well if it had a .ca today.
You've had a series of internal promotions, specifically at Bluant Media. If anyone listening to this is looking at their own job right now and going, you know what, I don't want to move on from here, but I do want to move up in the company, what advice would you give them?
My advice is to take risk and be a bit patient. I think that there is sometimes a tendency, and don't get me wrong, these things are obviously very important, but to really focus on the compensation and the title. And many people I've met through my career will say, well, there's an opportunity for me to manage this team, but they're not going to like take it on in addition to your current workload, but they're not going to change my title. They're not going to change my pay. And I mean, it's not always going to work out. Like you have to have some sense of where it may land eventually, but that's okay to start. Maybe take the risk because the experience is going to help you get to your next rung in the ladder. And also you're showing a commitment to the company that you're willing to believe in them and buy in and be a little bit patient. And for me, I like a challenge. So I took on full departments without getting more money and title changes, but eventually the money and the titles did come. And so I would say, and again, it is a risk. It's not always going to work out in your favor, but to have some patience and believe in what you're doing.
Let's bring this full circle. Your role at NLogic, how did it present itself? Did you find the role or did the role find you?
I was approached for the job. And at first, I've told them this, I'd never heard of the company before. And this day and age, you never even know what's real or not, if I'm being spammed or not. I did look into it. It was a legitimate job inquiry. And it took, I think it was about 6 months back and forth. But I was very hesitant in the beginning. I was loyal to Blue Ant. I obviously, as you said, had worked my way up there. I was very comfortable there. I knew what I was doing inside and out. And I didn't necessarily want to expose myself to something that I felt very not very uncomfortable. It wasn't my type background experience. So it felt a big stretch.
How long is the interview process for someone at your level?
It was around 6 months it took.
How do you stay motivated when it's 6 months? How do you remain patient too?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. In my case, because I was approached and I was still employed at Blue Ant, I didn't have that sense of urgency of if you were job hunting, or if you were unemployed, I should say job hunting. So that worked in my favor. By the end, and it spanned over the like winter holiday break, I by the end, I didn't think I had the job. I thought I was just being kept on till one or more of the other candidates accepted, and I was convinced of that at the end. But I did get and maybe that happened, who knows? But doesn't really matter because I did get offered the role and I accepted it. Again, it goes back to, I guess, having some trust in the system and in yourself. And it's part of just, as I said earlier in the interview, just, I am someone who takes risk, and I have a high risk tolerance, I would say.
I had a chance to attend one of your events back in April. And tell us a little bit about what's in the pipeline for NLogic and what are you guys going to be focusing on and launching in the near future?
Well, thanks for coming to our event. That was a big deal for me. It was on April 17th. It was to the day, my 1-year anniversary. And you'll know that because I talked about it. We didn't plan it that way. It just happened to fall. The venue that we booked happened to fall on that exact day. And one of the big things that we focused on in the event was a new product that we've just started to launch in market called the Video Planner. And this is a reach and frequency calculator that's taking the linear data that NLogic and our parent company Numeris is famous for. TAM is often called TAM. It's been distributed by NLogic through products like Infosys or Instar, if you've heard of them, or Lens. Anyone who works in TV measurement would know these software products. But it's taking the TAM data and it's allowing you to look at it with streaming. So, Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon, et cetera, plus online video, plus even social video, and see total reach and frequency, unduplicated reach and frequency for the first time. And it's using, I say it's taking the TAM linear data, but it's using a data set called VAM, Video Audience Measurement, which is the first cross-platform data set in Canada that's using a people panel methodology. So it's exciting. I'd say there's a really strong interest from the agency side on the planning tool and what the planning tool's allowing agencies and advertisers directly, as well as broadcasters, be able to see kind of for the first time, they're getting an insight into what inventory and audience looks like across both linear, like cable TV, and digital and streaming. So that was one of the big things we talked about at the event. And there's a few other products, but that's our big cross-platform focus. And we are, as I said, a linear radio business as our foundation, and are really focused on continuing to focus on that and branch out into cross-platform moving forward.
Sue, this has been a fantastic chat. Are you ready for rapid fire questions?
I think so.
The campaign you were most proud of?
Okay, so not being a direct salesperson, it's not quite a campaign, but a project. And I would say I launched an e-commerce store for Cottage Life, and we even designed all the merch, like T-shirts and mugs and stuff, and stored all stored it all in a warehouse in Toronto, and that was really, really exciting.
Your favorite movie?
I told you before, I don't really do favorites, but I'm going to say League of Their Own because I've watched it probably 11 or 12 times with my two daughters, and I coach baseball, and I played baseball for about 13 years growing up. And I think I like watching Madonna in it too. It's pretty good.
If Hollywood were to make a movie based on your life story, who would you want to play you?
This is so hard. I'm going to go with actors that people say remind them of me, which I don't know if I agree, but Kristen Wiig or Laura Linney. I'm going to say Kristen or Laura.
My follow-up question, if Hollywood were to make that movie based on your life story, what would you call it?
So I use GTP for this, Indomitable, the Sue Haas saga.
Your favorite book?
The most recent book I read is called Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, and it's really great. I recommend it.
Your favorite song?
My oldest daughter's got me into Lana Del Rey, and I really like her rendition of Take Me Home Country Roads.
Oh, a John Denver cover.
It is, and it ties into my whole story of growing up in the country.
Best advice you've ever received?
This is relatively new advice from Neil McEnany, the CEO of Numeris, who said to me, the best leaders only know about 50% of how to do their job at any given time. And the idea here is that you're always learning, you're always being creative, and you're always getting out of your comfort zone, and you never get complacent. And that gives me comfort knowing that he buys into that, because I can guarantee you I didn't know much more than 50% when I started.
My signature closing question, if you weren't in media, what would you be doing and why?
I think I would be sort of happy in anything that pushed and challenged me, but I was in a botanical garden a few weeks ago, and it did pop into my head that this would be a pretty cool job. I do love the outdoors, of course. I love plants. I do like gardening and being in nature, but I would eventually have to probably manage the staff or the expansion into another garden, because I do like running things.
Sue, this has been a fantastic chat. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Victor. It was great connecting again.